اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألف لام ميم. ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صل على محمد وآل محمد. Inshallah, today I would like to focus our discussion on the treaty that was made between Imam Hassan alayhi salam and Muawiyah. But before I start, I would like to read a few words regarding the treaty, the conversation that took place between Muawiyah and Imam Hassan alayhi salam. Sallallahu Muhammadin wa alihi. Obvious, it's a lengthy treaty, and we're just gonna dissect a little bit of the treaty. So, while the treaty was going on, and while the Khalifat or the supporters, while Imam Hassan was standing up against the oppressors, he addressed Muawiyah by saying the following. And today we are amazed by your claim to the Khalifat, even though you do not deserve it in the least. Neither you have any religious superiority, nor any good record in the past. You are a product of a group that fought against the Prophet and the son of the worst enemy of the Prophet among the Quraysh, right? So here, Imam Hassan alayhi salam told Muawiyah, advised Muawiyah to give back the Khilafat where it rightfully belonged. Muawiyah declined by saying the following. You and my situation, let's pay attention here. He says, you and my situation is similar to your family and Abu Bakr's situation. Meaning what? The situation that we have now, it's similar to Imam Ali alayhi salam and the situation of Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr occupied the Caliphate on the pretext of having more experience than your father. Abu Bakr having more experience than Amir al-Mu'mineen. Similarly, I find myself to be more experienced than you. SubhanAllah. Muawiyah being more experienced. Now here we're speaking about experience. You want to speak about experience? Who was Muslim before? Muawiyah or Imam Hassan? Who was Muslim before? Let's compare the similarities here. Who was Muslim before? Abu Bakr or Imam Ali alayhi salam? So you want to compare about experience. Who lived with the Prophet longer? Who was amongst the supporters of the Prophet? Imam Ali, was he the first supporter of the Prophet, or was Abu Bakr the first supporter of the Prophet? SubhanAllah, we should look at these stuff. We should open our mind. We should use common sense. We should use our logic when it comes to these discussions. Sallallahu Muhammadin wa alihi. Because remember, when it comes to Islam, when it comes to the leadership of Islam, the divine leadership of Islam, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to select the appropriate leaders for it. Just like how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selected the prophets, it's the same how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selects the imams in order to guide the people. Sallallahu Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.
Now, when someone is to look at a covenant or a treaty or an agreement in this world, in today's world, when we look at a covenant or an agreement or a contract, it is a binding contract, either verbal or written. It is a binding contract that it's to be respected, and if one of the two parties were to break that contract, then either you take them to courts or you go on to whatever the agreement is. So for example, if someone was to rent a house, a lease is written out, a contract is written out. Now if that contract is not respected, right, the consequences are either the person is evicted, the person is given time before the landlord can evict the person, or so forth, right? If I have a binding contract, if I buy a car, and if I have a binding contract with the dealership, and if I do not make payments on the car, what happens? They repossess the car. Same thing with the house, they repossess the house. Now if I have a binding contract regarding something else, and I say if these situations or if these requirements are not met, then and only then does the Khalifa go back to its rightful home. Now, did Imam Hassan alayhi salam make these certain contracts? And did both parties agree to the contract? Because according to Islamic law, both parties have to agree in the Islamic contract. When we look into the Western, if I do not agree with the contract, according to the Western society, according to the laws, if I don't agree to the contract, to a certain contract, then that contract is void. It's invalid. It's worthless. But if both parties agree to the contract, then that's when the contract is binding. Meaning what? I have to sign, the other person has to sign. Alright? Now, let us go into the contract of Imam Hassan alayhi salam. But before we do that, let us look at some narrations that the Prophet ﷺ said regarding Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Why? Because this will help us and to determine who was in the right and who was in the wrong. Rasulullah is noted to have said a prophetic tradition that says Al-Hassan and Hussein are imams either standing or sitting. Meaning what? Either they stand up against oppression and fight the transgressors, or if they sit down, meaning they do not fight the oppressors. So, if we were to go with this tradition, Imam Hussein, does this make Imam Hassan an imam? Of course. Does it make Imam Hussein the imam? Of course. Why? Because Imam Hassan sat and Imam Hussein stood. And if the roles were reversed, it will remain the same. Meaning what? If Imam Hussein was in the same position as Imam Hassan alayhi salam, he would remain sitting. And if Imam Hassan was in the position of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he will also stand against he will stand up against oppression. So if the roles were reversed, it will still remain the same. But in this case, we heard before, 2 days ago, we heard about the birth of Imam Hassan alayhi salam. Yesterday, we spoke about the characteristics and the morals of Imam Hassan alayhi salam. Why? To lead up to today, to lead up to the treaty. Why? Because truthfulness is important in making the morals and the characteristics of a person. If we're to look at the morals and compare the morals of Imam Hassan alayhi salam and Muawiyah, which one has a higher moral than the other? Let us compare this. Let us open our minds. Let us compare the two morals of these individuals and see who was in the right and who was in the wrong. Because if we cannot judge who is in the right and who is in the wrong, then let me take the Quran and let me take the prophetic tradition and use that as a scale in measuring who is in the right and who is in the wrong. If I still want to challenge that, then let me go back to the prophetic tradition where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, obey Allah, obey those who have authority, obey the Prophet, obey those who have authority over you. And if you differ, then what? Then refer it back to Allah and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if we go by these guidelines, we will understand what is the truth and what is falsehood. Now, when we go into the Quran, there are so many verses that speak about those who break the covenant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we can use this to prove our point when it comes to the peace treaty of Imam Hassan alayhi salam. In Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter number 2, verse 100, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, is it not that every time they took a covenant, a party of them threw it away, but most of them do not believe? Now what happens to a certain person, to certain individuals who break the covenant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds in a different surah, in Surah Al-Anfal, chapter number 8, verse 56, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, those of them with whom you have made a covenant, meaning a treaty, then they break their covenants every time, and they do not safeguarding themselves. And in another one, in Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter number 5, verse 13, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to say, so for their breaking of the covenants, we curse them. We do what? We curse them. So now, let us go back. Who is the one cursed here? Imam Hassan alayhi salam? Did he break the covenant or did Muawiyah break the covenant? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues in saying, and made their hearts hard. They distort words from their usage, meaning the proper usage, and have forgotten the portion of that which they were reminded. And you will still observe deceit among them, except a few of them, but pardon them and overlook their misdeeds. Indeed, Allah loves the doers of good. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is telling us that if you make a covenant, do not break it. Because if you break that covenant, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has cursed that individual whomsoever breaks their covenants. Sallallahu Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Now let us make a note that there were more conditions put on the treaty or on the peace treaty that was done. But I'm just going to go over a few. But also we have to keep in mind that the reason why Imam Hassan alayhi salam signed a covenant or made a peace treaty wasn't because he was a coward like what some believers say or what some, the followers of the Ahlul Bayt say. Astaghfirullah. That Imam Hassan alayhi salam was weak. Why was he weak? Do they not read? Do they not read history? Because if they read history, they would have known that Imam Hassan alayhi salam had supporters ready to stand up against Muawiyah. But what did Muawiyah do? Because he was a good politician, we have to give him that. He used to buy the supporters of and bribe the supporters of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, to the point that he even infiltrated the commanders of his army, to the point that even the commanders, Imam Hassan's commanders, his own commanders, turned against him, to the point that they stabbed him. Where Imam Hassan alayhi salam stood up to the people and addressed the people and asked them, what do you want? Do you want to fight? Then, yallah, come, let's go fight. They responded in such a response that, no, we do not want to fight. So if someone does not have supporters, and if Imam Hassan was to stand up, where are the supporters? This reminds me of today's era. Where are the supporters of Sahib al-Zaman? He's waiting for us. So now let us go onto the peace treaty and to read a little bit of them. One of them was to entrust the Khalifa of Muawiyah on the condition that he would act to Allah's book, meaning the Quran, and the Prophet's traditions, meaning what? The Itra, the Ahlul Bayt. Right? That's the first condition, meaning what? If Muawiyah was to remain in power, then he's to follow the book of Allah, the Quran, and the prophetic traditions, meaning the Itra, the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. 2, the Khalifa should be handed over to Imam al-Hassan if the death of Muawiyah comes. And if Imam Hassan dies, then the Khalifa is to go to whom? None other but Imam Hussein alayhi salam. The third condition, Muawiyah will agree. This is very important, brothers and sisters. Muawiyah will agree and put a stop to the cursing of the true Amir al-Mu'mineen on the minbars that's taking place. Number 4, Muawiyah will agree not to claim the money of the belongings or the treasure of Kufa. So meaning what? Muawiyah was taking something that did not belong to him. He was usurping. And we know when you usurp something, when you steal something, this becomes haram. Number 5, all Muslims in all corners of the Muslim world, whether in Sham, Iraq, Hijaz, or Yemen, will be able to live in peace and enjoy safety. All races and all sects will be able to live in safety, and no one should follow up on old grudges and seek retribution from the other. Right? Let's look at number 5 for a minute. Let's go back to Karbala and let's go back to Yazid. What did he say? What's his famous word? Oh, only if my forefathers were here, they would be happy to know that I've taken revenge on. But, right? Contract is broken. Let's go back to the first one, where he will follow the book of Allah and the Ahlul Bayt. Broken. Let us go back again. Where, if he were to pass away before Imam Hassan passes away, the Khilafah will return back to Imam Hassan. If Imam Hassan was to die and Muawiyah was still alive, the Khalifa will go to whom? Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Did this happen in history? No. So, I ask brothers and sisters, who broke the covenants? Who is the one that's cursed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is it Imam Hassan alayhi salam? Because it's either the two. It's common sense. It's either these two individuals are cursed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm not going to say who. It is up to us. It is up to everyone else to go read and to find out who are the individuals that were cursed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding the ayah that we reviewed. Is it Imam Hassan alayhi salam or is it Muawiyah? If it's Imam Hassan alayhi salam that's cursed, then I should not follow him. But if it's Muawiyah that's cursed, then I should not follow him. I should remain on Sirat al-Mustaqim. Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim. Do we not read this? Or are we just reading this like parrots and not comprehend what we read? Or are we just ignoring history? Because some people out there, they're like, brother, this is history. Let us not pay attention to it. Why? Why should I turn blind to history? This is the argument of the weak. Imam Hassan alayhi salam taught us to stand up against injustice whenever we see it. Through his examples, through his character, through his noble character, we learn that Imam Hassan alayhi salam was the most beloved of the prophets. Did we not hear stories of how he used to sit and the Prophet used to carry him? And people would say, oh, wow, how noble are you, Hassan, riding? The Prophet responded, what? No, how noble I am to have a rider such as Imam Hassan alayhi salam. Inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide everyone. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us in finding the truth. And please, if we can please recite Surah Al-Fatiha for those who have passed away, and the safety, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala please give shafa'ah to Shaykh Abdul Minam. If we can please recite Surah Al-Fatiha after Allah Salat Muhammadin wa Ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.
Now we have about 10 minutes and we have Jawad and Hassan who will recite al-Mankabat. हाजिरी के लिए तमाम मोमिनीन को इमाम हसन की विलादत बहुत बहुत मुबारक हो। हदिये के लिए 2 शेर पढ़ रहा हूँ और उसके बाद मैं ask मौला अली मेरा आका अली अली मौला अली मेरा आका दीने मोहम्मदी का सहारा अली अली मौला अली मेरा आका अली सब मिलके एक नारे हैदरी اس کا ہر ایک بگڑا ہوا کام بن گیا، اس کا ہر ایک بگڑا ہوا کام بن گیا، مشکل میں جب کسی نے پکارا علی علی، مشکل میں جب کسی نے پکارا علی علی، جب فتح جنگ ہو نہ سکی 3 روز تک، جب فتح جنگ ہو نہ سکی 3 روز تک، آخر لبے رسول سے نکلا علی علی، آخر لبے رسول سے نکلا علی علی، مولا علی علی میرا آقا علی علی، بر محمد و آل محمد بلند صلوات۔ اب میں درخواست کروں گا جناب جواد رضوی سے کہ وہ تشریف لائیں اور آپ آ کر ہدیہ پیش کریں۔ جواد رضوی۔
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد، اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد۔
بلاتے ہیں رو رو کے اہل عذاب، چلے آؤ ابن مشکل کشا، بلاتے ہیں رو رو کے اہل عذاب، چلے آؤ ابن مشکل کشا، تمہیں آ کے زہرا کہے واسطہ، چلے آؤ ابن مشکل کشا، بلاتے ہیں رو رو کے اہل عذاب، چلے آؤ ابن مشکل کشا، ہے پہلی جہان میں عجب سی وبا، عطا سارے عالم کو کیجئے شفا، عطا سارے عالم کو کیجئے شفا، وسیلہ ہے بیمار کرب و بلا، چلے آؤ ابن مشکل کشا، بلاتے ہیں رو رو کے اہل عذاب، چلے آؤ ابن مشکل کشا، بلاتے ہیں رو رو کے اہل عذاب، چلے آؤ ابن مشکل کشا، خدا کی شریعت کا دل شاد ہو، یہ ویران کعبہ پھر آباد ہو، یہ ویران کعبہ پھر آباد
ماشاءاللہ بیٹا
بلاتے ہیں رو رو کے اہل عزا، چلے آؤ ابن مشکل کشا، میرا خواب بھی ماں تعبیر ہو، اے مولا بقیہ کی تعمیر ہو، اے مولا بقیہ کی تعمیر ہو، لبوں پر مسلسل یہی ہے دعا، چلے آؤ ابن مشکل
ماشاءاللہ بیٹا
بلاتے ہیں رو رو کے اہل عزا، چلے آؤ ابن مشکل کشا، ہمارے عمل میں دکھاوا نہ ہو، محبت ایک بس جھوٹا دعوا نہ ہو، محبت کا بس جھوٹا دعوا نہ ہو، پھر عشقوں کے لب خود یہ دیں گے صدا، چلے آؤ ابن مشکل کشا، بلاتے ہیں رو رو کے اہل عزا، چلے آؤ ابن مشکل کشا، بلاتے ہیں رو رو کے اہل عزا، چلے آؤ ابن مشکل کشا، تمہیں تو زمانے کے ہو چارگار، میری موت سے بہتر تمہیں خبر، میری موت سے بہتر تمہیں خبر، کہوں کیا میں حال دل غم زدہ، چلے آؤ میں ابن مشکل کشا، بلاتے رو رو کے اہل عزا، چلے آؤ ابن مشکل کشا، تمہیں آ کے ذرا کہے واسطہ، چلے آؤ ابن مشکل کشا،
اللہم
صلی علی محمد والی محمد ماشاءاللہ بیٹا ماشاءاللہ 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 شاباش بیٹا
ویری گڈ جاب جوان
اللہم صلی علی محمد والی محمد
دل سے مرتضیٰ کو تو پکار، صرف ایک بار، صرف ایک بار، دل سے مرتضیٰ کو تو پکار، صرف ایک بار، صرف ایک
ماشاءاللہ
صدق دل سے کر کے اعتبار، صرف ایک بار، صرف ایک بار، یہ شرف یہ مرتبہ کسی کو کب ملا، مادر علی شرف ہے یہ بھی آپ کا، در بنی ہے کعبے کی جدا،
سبحان اللہ
صرف ایک بار،
ماشاءاللہ بیٹا
دل سے مرتضیٰ کو تو پکار، صرف ایک بار،
ماشاءاللہ
رنج سے رہا ہو اور غم پہ غم ملے، گر قدم قدم پہ گھیرتی ہے مشکلیں، نام مرتضیٰ کا کر حساب، صرف ایک بار، صرف ایک بار، دل سے مرتضیٰ کو تو پکار، صرف ایک بار، صرف
محمد ماشاء اللہ بیٹا ماشاء اللہ خوش رہو
پہلے آپ سب کو حضرت امام حسن علیہ السلام کی ولادت مبارک ہو اور تیار تو میں نے مرتبت بھی کیا بٹ بیکاز آف دس ٹائم میں 2-3 اشعار پڑھوں گا دیکھ ساتھ اے منکر حیدر تیرے بارے میں نہیں ہے منکر حیدر تیرے بارے میں نہیں ہے والعصر جو مومن ہے خسارے میں نہیں ہے
سبحان اللہ
منکر حیدر تیرے بارے میں نہیں ہے اور یہ کمال کا شعر ہے حسنین کے صدقے میں عطا کر تو میں لے لوں حسنین کے صدقے میں عطا کر تو میں لے لوں ورنہ تیری دنیا مجھ بارے میں نہیں ورنہ تیری دنیا مجھ بارے میں نہیں ہے جتنا غم شبیر میں روتا ہوں میں اتنا جتنا غم شبیر میں روتا ہوں میں اتنا پانی کا تناسب میرے گھرے میں نہیں اے منکر حیدر تیرے بارے میں نہیں ہے
اللہم صلی علی محمد